Flutter, React, TensorFlow, PyTorch, LLVM, Go, Hadoop, Airflow, Visual Studio, Zookeeper, OpenTelemetry, Terraform. All of those are free and open source, and all of them were created within the walls of profit-driven companies. Why spend so much time and money developing something that you're just going to give away for free? Why would Facebook commit to spending billions of dollars moving forward to train their Llama AI models to just release them to the open source? How did MongoDB, which really only makes one open source product called MongoDB, achieve a market cap of $30 billion? And why in the world did Elon Musk release all of Tesla's patents in 2019? The question of why do companies open source was a really interesting one to me for a couple of different reasons. First off, it felt like companies were just giving away their competitive advantages whenever they open source something, but I knew that the opposite had to be true. I just wasn't quite sure why. And the second big reason is a little out of left field, but I've really started to believe in the Web 3.0 movement. I never used to, and now I do. And that was sort of the impetus for the first video that I ever made on this channel. It was on Web 3.0. Distributed ownership is at the core of what blockchain is, sort of what open source is. And better understanding open source means a better understanding of blockchain and why that's going to work too. So I've done a whole lot of digging on the topic of open source and why companies choose to do it. I found most answers were really, really unsatisfying. You've probably found the same, which is why you're here. But there were 5 reasons that really compelled me. That's what I've narrowed it down to, and that's what I want to share here. So the first reason why companies open source is to protect against competitors. Tactically, I find this so fascinating. Offense is sexy, but as they say in the NBA, defense wins championships, and it seems like that's how a lot of companies think about the open source. Not as a tool for offense, but rather a tool for defense. Kubernetes is an awesome example of this. Kubernetes is one of my favorite things to talk about and least favorite things to spell. It was developed by Google. It's a container orchestration platform, and it has lots of benefits that I'll probably make a video about at some point. But one of the greatest benefits is that it makes it very easy for you to take these applications that you've already deployed to a Kubernetes environment and move those to different cloud providers. And concerned about AWS running away with the cloud computing business, because they were and they do continue to be the dominant player in cloud, Google decided to open source Kubernetes in 2014. And with the help of the Linux Foundation, they managed to get other cloud providers like IBM Cloud, Microsoft Azure to buy in and support Kubernetes. And at some point, AWS had to cave and support Kubernetes as well. So now there's this standard that enables developers like myself, big companies, to create applications once and not necessarily be locked into a particular cloud vendor for deploying those applications. I've heard Chamath Palihapitiya, a name that gives me almost as much trouble as Kubernetes, describe this tactic as closed source when you're ahead, open source when you're behind. And a great recent example of this would be large language models. OpenAI was the first mover with LLMs, and as such, they decided to close source their models, really hold on to that advantage for as long as they could. Not very OpenAI of them, but hey, that's business. And then comes along Facebook with their Llama models, which they open source, and because of that, they turned LLMs, this magical finite resource that existed behind the walled garden of OpenAI, into this commodity resource that's now offered by hundreds of vendors at a very high quality, to the point where we all basically use them for free. Very few of us pay for it. And not only has that move given Facebook a lot of cachet, branded them as one of the world leaders in AI at the moment, it also eroded away this competitive advantage that OpenAI had. So that's reason number 1, to protect against competitors, essentially arm the rebels. Reason number 2 is to increase adoption of one's products. You're probably familiar with SQL databases. These are databases that are essentially organized like Excel spreadsheets with rows and columns, and they are by far the most popular and common type of database out there. And we call databases that buck this trend and organize data in different ways NoSQL databases. And it's a very broad category. But within that category, there are 2 companies that really crush it, that have really made something super unique. And those would be MongoDB and Elastic, which make MongoDB and Elasticsearch respectively. All you've got to know is that these companies have built databases that are truly unique. They've made something that is really new and different. But as a developer or as a company, Adopting a technology that is new and unique, especially if it is owned and managed by a singular entity, aka closed source, comes with so many risks. Because the tool is new and different, me and my team need to develop new and different skills in order to use it. We need to write new and different code. It's not like writing SQL, which is going to apply to a MySQL database and a Postgres database. I need to write Mongoose code for MongoDB. And that's a huge risk because what if the company jacks up their prices? We have no choice but to pay because what are we going to do? This code doesn't apply elsewhere. We don't want to start from scratch. Or God forbid the company goes out of business and now all this code and these skills that we've developed are rendered useless. And what if while implementing this tool, I encounter bugs that need fixing or I need a feature to be added? That's not something that I can do myself. I can't see the code. I can't change the code. My only recourse really is to make a request to the company directly and just fingers crossed they address it in the next update. And if you're trying to move fast as a developer or as a company, you often don't have the space to just sit on your hands. You want to be the master of your own fate. And there are security concerns with this stuff as well. I can't see this code. I just have to trust because the company told me that if I put user data in there or my intellectual property in there, it's all just going to be safe and secure. I don't know. So for all those reasons, my team and I might choose to go with a different tool in that category that is open source or that has more standard compatibility with the rest of the category, just to de-risk things, even though what's better for our use case might be this new and special tool that was developed. But if the company open sources their software, now we can have a conversation, because if I as a user know that I can fix bugs when I encounter them, add features when I need them, turn to a community of developers around this software whenever I have an issue, not just turn to the company directly, see the code and verify that it's secure. And God forbid, if the company goes out of business or decides to be more predatory with their pricing, take this code elsewhere or fork their repository, well, now I'm way more comfortable adopting your product. Even if at the end of the day, I'm just paying this company for a managed service for their enterprise version of their software, their closed source version of that software, simply knowing that the open source version is out there is enough peace of mind for me to feel comfortable adopting it. And that is how companies like MongoDB and Elastic manage to achieve market caps in the tens of billions of dollars. So that's reason number 2 why companies open source, which is to increase adoption of their products. Reason number 3 is to attract talent. When I first learned that the N in FANG stood for Netflix, I almost shit myself laughing. How is it that this company that at the time that I learned this was most famous for wingmanning Tinder dates, how did that belong in the same category as Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, not Microsoft for some reason? I, as an ambitious person, you as an ambitious person, you want to work at a very cool company that works on cutting edge things, a place where you're going to grow, a place where you're going to create things that move the boundary of your field forward. And I didn't think Netflix was a place where I would ever get to do that. But then I learned about Chaos Monkey. Production systems like Netflix, which are used by millions of people, often simultaneously, need to be really resilient. And they developed this rogue software called Chaos Monkey that essentially attacks certain elements of their production system randomly to expose bugs and make it so that they know what needs to be fixed. It was so bold, it's so innovative, and I only learned about it because they open sourced it. It made me appreciate the serious level of engineering that goes on at Netflix. And since learning about Chaos Monkey, I read a couple of books on their culture, and I've gotten to the point where if I were to change companies, Netflix is one of those places where I would feel very, very proud to work if I had the opportunity. Similar with Meta, they don't have the greatest reputation around their social media products, which are known to have a deleterious effect on folks' mental health, but they have open sourced a lot of really, really cool technology: PyTorch, GraphQL, React, Jest. They even created the Open Compute project, which I would love to talk about in some video. I would love to look into that more. That has had dramatic effects on improving data centers worldwide, helping players catch up to AWS, and essentially lower cloud costs for all of us users of cloud. And while none of this rights any wrongs on Meta's part, those contributions to the open source have been hugely meaningful. And it certainly makes the prospect of working there as an engineer so much more palatable and exciting than if they hadn't made those contributions. And that is a great reason to open source. A lot of companies have these awesome technologies within their walls that aren't exactly core to their business or their moats, their competitive advantages, that are essentially the equivalent of like hiding a rippling six-pack under a double XL hoodie. Open sourcing that tech is the nerd equivalent of taking off your shirt and posting a thirst trap, and it does work. So it's a meaningful reason to open source. That's reason number 3, to attract talent. Reason number 4 why companies open source is to strengthen their products. When you're younger, you have this naive belief that your parents have all the answers, and then you grow up and you realize that they're these fallible human beings just like you. And there's this similar effect when you're a junior engineer earlier in your career. You know that all the code that you write is buggy and terrible, and you have all this imposter syndrome, and you believe that all the code that comes out of these great companies is perfect and limitless. But then you graduate as an engineer, you become better, and you start working on more sophisticated things. You start pushing the boundaries of the languages and frameworks and tools that you use until eventually you do hit those limits. You find bugs that need fixing. You need features to be added so that you can get over issues that you're facing. And because you and your team need to move quickly, you often end up fixing that bug yourself or adding that feature yourself, and either out of altruism or realistically because you don't want to fork that project, you don't want your code to diverge from the open source, you contribute that back into the project. And now everyone who uses it can benefit from it, as well as the company that created the project in the first place. Meta's biggest products, Instagram and Facebook, are built with React, a framework that they themselves developed. Now, they could choose to keep that closed source and, hey, we just write React internally, no one else really knows about it, and we are the sole benefactors of this framework. Or, better yet, they could open source this framework. And now every single community contribution to React makes their products, Instagram and Facebook, faster, more secure, more feature rich. That's the product that people are really paying for. They're not paying for React, neither would anybody even try to. So that is one of the big benefits you're getting from open source in this case, is you are essentially sharing your development costs with the community. Plus, you get the added benefit of getting to hire people who already know React and can write it. No engineer, myself included, no one wants to go to a company and write code in a proprietary language that they can't use as a transferable skill on their own projects or put on a resume and use elsewhere. We all want to build skills that we can lift and shift into any situation we can find ourselves in further down the line. So that's reason number 4 why companies open source, to strengthen their products. Reason number 5 is to influence industry standards, essentially make the rest of the category do things your way. Imagine you drive a Toyota, and in this scenario, Toyota has their own proprietary design for their gas tanks. And because of that, you need to take your car to Toyota branded gas stations that they themselves set up that are compatible with your gas tank. You can't go to an ExxonMobil, a Chevron, a Shell, can't even use a jerry can. You have to go to specific Toyota owned and operated gas stations. That would be an insane existence. I don't care that Toyota's Prius is Motor Trend's Truck of the Year. I'm never buying a Toyota if those are the circumstances under which I got to drive one. And Toyota knows that. So they create cars that instead run on gas that you can find at any fuel station and that can be filled up in their car with the standard fuel nozzles that they'll find at any gas station as well. Of course, every company wants to emulate Apple. They want to vertically integrate. This is vertical. You want to vertically integrate, take up as much of the value chain as possible, but some amount of interoperability in a category is just unavoidable. Everybody in that particular category needs to agree on a standard way of doing things. And if that standardization is going to happen anyways, it is to your benefit to make everybody else do things your way, the way that you've already been doing things, so you have a bit of an advantage on the competition, as opposed to having to play catch up because you are now forced to do things somebody else's way. So Tesla is a really good example of this. They have adopted and made significant contributions to the Open Charge Point Protocol, which is essentially a communication protocol between charging stations and central management systems. this is one of those standards in the EV industry that a lot of people are converging on. So as new EV manufacturers come online, as more transition to OCPP, that means more paying customers for Tesla at Tesla's charging stations that are now compatible with these other EV manufacturers and their cars. It also means that Tesla customers have a better customer experience because now they can take their cars and charge them at other charging stations as well. It's very similar to that Toyota example that we went through before. And that is the fifth and final reason why companies open source, to make everyone else do it their way, i.e. influence industry standards. So in conclusion, I basically had it backwards. Companies don't open source their innovations because they're impactful. These innovations are only impactful because they're open source. Take an audit of all those technologies that I've listed and talked about throughout this video. Rarely are any of them core to the business that these companies are doing. They're just another part of the infrastructure. And as such, it's not really putting them at any competitive disadvantage. It's not eroding their moat to go and give it away for free. In fact, it is benefiting them for those 5 reasons that we discussed. And that is why companies open source. So thank you for watching or listening to this. I am very new to the content game, as I'm sure is obvious to you, but I love talking about the present and future of computing, and I plan on continuing to do this. So it would be hugely validating for me if you would consider subscribing, liking, commenting, all that good stuff. That would definitely make me want to keep going. Thank you.